So we're in your United States history book in chapter 27, section 3. We're going to do section 3 in at least 2 videos because it's a pretty long section. But we're going to be talking about the Cold War in Asia. As you recall, the Cold War is that war against communism. We're going to be focusing now on the foreign relations. We're going to focus on actually 2 different wars during this time. So first, we're going to look at Guam and the Philippines after the war, World War II, and on to after World War II with Japan. And then we're going to go into the Korean War and the Chinese dilemma, onto Southeast Asia and the Vietnam War. So you can see here by the key, you can see the area in purple are the communist countries. We have China and the Soviet Union, North Vietnam, and we have over here Korea. South Korea is not being, and on to the Cold War hotspots. As you can see, Korea was a hotspot, and we have some hotspots over here. And then on to the orange areas being those former European colonies, and a lot of them were becoming independent during this time too. And once a country became independent, then the communists would come in to try to control the government if they couldn't control themselves. You know, that was one of their tactics. So let's go on into this foreign relations that we're talking in the Cold War in Asia now. We're going to start with Asia. Asia. The communist regimes attempted to take over Asian countries, like I said before. The United States attempted to stop communism's spread. So we wanted to stop it. They were spreading communism. Ultimately, these conflicts led to 2 major wars. What were these wars? The Korean War between North and South Korea here, and on to the war in Vietnam between North and South Vietnam and Indochina. But those countries that were not under communist control saw their economies boosted under prosperity, and this prosperity even reached to unimaginable heights in some cases. So you can see the difference between those countries that were controlled by communism and were left in poverty, and those that were given independent rights and free enterprise governments that would prosper. So these pictures, of course, these are showing the war in Korea and the war in Vietnam here that we're going to be talking about partly in this video. So we're going to first start with talking about the acquisitions from the Spanish-American War that were under our protection. So several of the United States territories gained during this time. After World War II, these became organized territories or independent nations. Guam in 1898 was this small island under the control of the United States Navy. But in 1950, the territory of the United States, they became a territory of the United States, and the people became United States citizens in 1950. So Guam now, being able to be a citizen of the United States, flourished. The territory transferred from the Navy to the Department of the Interior, and they even elected a one-house legislator. And since 1970, they have their own governor. So here we have some pictures of Guam. Guam in the battle. Remember, Guam was actually a center of World War II, and that Japan had attacked Guam, and that our Navy had been situated there and took Guam back. So, on to the Philippines. The Philippine Island, the Philippines. Following the Spanish-American War, again, they moved towards self-government. In 1907, the Filipinos began electing an assembly for lawmaking. In 1916, Congress adopted the Jones Act, allowing Filipino voters to elect a Senate as well as an assembly. So the Jones Act was preparing them for their own government. So this would give Filipinos suffrage. What is suffrage? Voting rights. They would have voting rights now. So, and their executive would be a governor, and the governor would be appointed by the United States president. And the Jones Act provided for independence once the islands were stable. There's going to be two acts you have to remember. First is the Jones Act, and this all has to do with the Philippines because it was preparing them so that they could become independent, and we would just, in the meantime, be protecting them. So here's some cool pictures. Here's a picture clear back in the Spanish-American War, and where the Philippines basically they ended up becoming under our control. Here we have this is of course in World War II, when General Douglas MacArthur said, "I will be back," and he came back to save the day in the Philippines from the Filipinos being attacked, under Japan's control at that time, and World War II. We already went over all that, so some pictures here. Here again is another picture of a statue here during the war, and a lot of World War II took place in the Philippines. The Tydings-McDuffie Act, another act, the second one. Remember the Jones Act. Now we have the Tydings-McDuffie Act. In 1934, this provided that the Philippines would become an independent country in 1946. Meanwhile, it would be a commonwealth under the United States protection. So it's a commonwealth until this goes along with the Jones Act, until it could become independent. In 1935, the first president was elected. And following World War II, the Philippines became independent. They became an independent nation on July 4th, just like our 4th of July, only in 1946. So that was their Independence Day. Here's a picture of their Independence Day. The Republic of Philippines was established with the United States to give her aid. And then Philippine products were admitted to the United States. They didn't have to pay any tariffs until 1954. And the United States and the Philippines signed a mutual defense pact for the defense bases to be on the islands until 1992. So we are still having great ties with the United States, and the Philippines basically since has been under our protection. So here's a picture of the Tydings-McDuffie. Just remember, Tydings-McDuffie and Jones Act have to do with the Philippines. American occupation of Japan. After World War II, President Truman appointed General Douglas MacArthur as the Supreme Commander of the Allied occupation of Japan. And he would give directives to the Japanese emperor and to the government. MacArthur influenced sweeping changes in Japan's economy, not only in its economy, also in its politics and social life. MacArthur realized Japan's real needs were primarily moral and spiritual. I love what he says here. That's why I really, really think of Douglas MacArthur as a hero, as one of the generals, not only of World War II, but also of promoting the gospel. So he said, whenever possible, I told visiting Christian ministers of the need for their work in Japan. The more missionaries we can bring out here and the more occupation troops we can send home, the better. And he brought in these pocket New Testaments at my request. The Pocket New Testament League, at my request, distributed 10 million Bibles translated into Japanese. He brought in 10 million Bibles. He's my kind of guy, right? My kind of general. And gradually, a spiritual regeneration in Japan began to grow. The Japanese developed great respect and admiration for General MacArthur, who prepared Japan to assume the place of a peaceful power in the Far East. I love these pictures here, of the American troops in Japan, and General MacArthur, Douglas MacArthur, protecting them at this point and bringing in the gospel. Here's a picture of the general with the Emperor of Japan here, rare picture of that. You know, we usually don't have very many pictures of the Emperor of Japan, but here. And here's a picture of the Bible, the Holy Bible here, translated into Japanese here. So what a great, the American now occupation of Japan. And Japan became an ally of ours, despite World War II. Treaties with Japan. In the 1950s, the United States signed a mutual defense pacts with Australia, New Zealand, and the Philippines. President Truman, and his administration held a Japanese peace treaty conference in San Francisco. And this treaty was signed by Japan with 47 former enemy nations signed with Japan. And this went into effect on April 28, 1952. And it officially ended the Allied occupation of Japan. The United States and Japan also signed the United States-Japan Security Treaty, which provided for the continuance of American bases and troops in Japan. So here we have Japan coming into San Francisco and signing the treaty with 47 of its former enemies. Can you believe that? What an amazing thing. So Japan signing the treaty here. We have the Japanese signed all peace treaties ending the war and pledged to pay war reparations to the countries they had harmed. And American troops were allowed to remain in Japan, all these things. And the Japanese were not permitted to build any military at this time, you can imagine. So here basically is that treaty signed in San Francisco with Japan. Now we're going to get into Korea, the Korean governments, the North and South Korea, right? So this is going to lead into the Korean War. So the Russian troops invaded Manchuria in North Korea. We're talking now about the Cold War. We're talking about communism. And so the Russian troops invading Manchuria is really close. Manchuria is in China, but it's really close to North Korea. And it's basically coming into North Korea. And so this is the closing days of World War II. You know, probably didn't even know what was going on. And so then the American forces moved to occupy the southern half of Korea. So both nations agreed to allow Koreans to form a unified independent country. They said, okay, if they want to, they can get together and be one country. But the hostility between the Soviet Union and the United States made this impossible because those two separate governments were established, and basically the two ideologies of communism and free enterprise did not, get along. They could not get along to be one nation. So, but the two separate governments were established, and the line there is called the 38th parallel of latitude. And this partitioned the North Korea and the South Korea. Even today, there it is. You are now crossing the 38th parallel right here. There's a road going by there. And here we have North Korea and South Korea. The democratic government set in South Korea was by free election on May 10th of 1948. And the communists, though, imposed Soviet-style regime on September 9th of 1948 in Korea. So May 10th, the Democrats party is set up in South Korea, and then on September 9th, we have the communist government set up, only a few months apart. So I guess here's North Korea. Even you think of North Korea today, it's the same philosophy. You will all die in terrible pain. They're very communistic and very hostile country. So here we have North Korea and South Korea. So it looks like possible problems there, don't you think? And it does. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953. You can remember those dates. With the fall of North Korea, the small nation of South Korea was threatened with a communist takeover now. So in January of 1950, Secretary of State Dan Acheson announced the United States would defend Japan and Philippines, but not interfere with the events on the Asian mainland. Bingo! So our Secretary of State basically said, okay, we're going to protect, Japan now. We're going to defend Japan and we'll defend the Philippines and everything, but we're going to stay out of Asia. So that gave the North Korea thinking, wow, they're not going to come and defend South Korea. So we might as well just, overtake South Korea now because the United States is not going to be in their defense. And that was actually a problem and a mistake for that to be declared. Because, then we saw Stalin, Stalin was still alive then. He was communist Russia, and Mao Zedong was of communist China, and North Korea had Kim Il-sung, they were all waiting for a time that they could actually take over South Korea, as South Korea then was prospering. And so North Korea invaded South Korea on June 25th, 1950. So 1950, January, by June, they decided to, only a few months, decided to invade after our Secretary of State said that we're not going to interfere with them, So their troops were trained and equipped by communist China. The North Korea, they had training and troops and weapons from Red China, the communist China, and from the Soviet Union. So they had a lot of support from the two biggest communist countries in the world. And so they quickly then overcame the South Korean forces. So their forces then continued to advance, and the North Koreans got all the way to Seoul. Seoul is South Korea's capital, and by June 27th, they had overtaken the capital. So here you have a picture of them coming in. Here's Korean War. It's called the Forgotten War because a lot of people don't think about it that much. But a lot of our soldiers died in this war. So anyway, here we have North Korea, Reds declare war. Here is the communist. We have Mao Zedong, communist China. We have Stalin of communist Soviet Union, and then again here in the middle we have the North Korea. Kim Il-sung, I think you say his name. But anyway, some pictures here. Here's some pictures of them too. Got their pictures taken together. The United States in South Korea. So the American air, naval, and ground forces became involved in Korea by July. In June, they attacked. Here's a picture. They come in here, they're advancing. The red advance here as North Korea is coming in to take over South Korea there. Truman appointed General MacArthur again, Douglas MacArthur. We talked about he was in Japan then. Remember, he was being actually in Japan doing the reconstruction and basically appointed as a governor in Japan. But now he brought him we need you in South Korea because we may have a war going on here. So here's Truman, President Truman, and General Douglas MacArthur. And so he would be commander of all the UN forces, United Nations forces, on July 8th. So by September, the outnumbered and outgunned South Koreans and Americans had withdrawn to a battle line in the southeast corner of Korea called the Pusan Perimeter. So here's the Pusan Perimeter right here. So this is the area you see in blue. They all drew in here, and now here it comes MacArthur with troops from America. You can see these pictures of troops coming in to help support South Korea in not being overtaken. And now we have a war. Landing at Incheon. Okay, General MacArthur ordered his troops to make a last stand at Pusan and engage as many of the North Koreans as possible. He surprised the world, though, on September 15th, 1950, by landing American forces at Incheon near Seoul, far to the northwest of the Pusan perimeter. So the UN troops captured the capital of Seoul and cut North Korea's supply lines and joined their troops who had broken out of the Pusan. So North Korean forces then collapsed. So by October, when we're talking now, September to October, General MacArthur and his American troops and the South Koreans had entered North Korea, and they started quickly overrunning the country. So MacArthur broadcast an appeal to the North Koreans and said for them to surrender. He said, you need to surrender, right? We're overcoming North Korea, but they rejected it. So here we have basically here's Korea. Here you see how close it is to Japan and such. The Sea of Japan between there. Here's pictures of the Korean War at Incheon, and so we're thinking, wow, this is great. Only a month or so, and we've overcome the North Koreans. But little did they expect what would happen. Red China joins North Korea. Here's Red China's troops coming in to join North Korea and help fight their battle. So Communist China feared the collapse of her puppet communist regime and sent 300,000 fresh soldiers across the Yalu River. So exhausted United Nations forces had outrun their main supply lines, and they were overwhelmed. All these fresh, 300,000 soldiers of China coming in, from Red China, Communist China. So MacArthur's troops were compelled to evacuate this Pyongyang, North Korean capital on December 4th in 1950. So they left North Korea. And Seoul again fell to the communists on January 4th. So the United troops now were entrenched into United Nations troops, I should call them. The United States was with them. They were entrenched in a defense line 25 miles south of Seoul, and the Red Chinese troops did subside. But anyway, here we have the Red China coming in and giving them weapons, North Korea weapons, and so many. See, Red China, they had already set up this puppet government that was in North Korea. So they already set it up. And so now they came in to defend, thinking, okay, we're going to get in since the United States is defending South Korea, we're going to come in and defend North Korea. Now we have almost a world war going on. So here's some pictures here. China enters the Korean War. Here's Mao Zedong. He's very evil, I have to say that. Even in his takeover, he killed about, 15 million people. He is very ruthless. So in China, he sent the soldiers there to North Korea, is basically what it's saying here. So it was, this was pretty major, especially since, General Douglas MacArthur and the United States thought we already had won the war. Didn't expect this to happen. MacArthur's dilemma. MacArthur's troops advanced north again on January 16th in 1951, and by March they reoccupied the capital of Seoul of South Korea. In April 11th of 1951, Truman and MacArthur disagreed. This is a big deal right here. President Truman and MacArthur disagreed, and the president removed General MacArthur from his duty. He fired him. And he replaced him with General Mather Bunker Ridgway. Here's General Ridgway here. So here's Truman, here's General Ridgway. And now we have what? He let Douglas MacArthur go, the great hero of World War II. And he already was getting prepared, for this war. So MacArthur had wanted to bomb the Red Chinese bases in Manchuria and the bridges and dams along the Yalu River to compel Chinese communists to withdraw from Korea. So on the Yalu River, he thought we need to do this, we need to bomb this and everything. The Chinese are coming in, we need to get them out of there, right? That's what, that's he was looking to win this war, right? He didn't believe in a no-win war. He said, we can't be containment. We need to go for it. So, but I think Truman decided not to because he had dropped the atomic bomb on Japan. And maybe he thought, oh, what are we going to have to do now? Drop the atomic bomb on China? Well, China and Russia have atomic bombs. So maybe he was thinking this would draw us into a world war. Could be. But we couldn't have a war, be involved in a war where we didn't want to win, right? So Truman and the leaders in Washington opposed all of Douglas MacArthur's measures. And then Douglas MacArthur said this is what needed to be done. And so Truman, they got into an argument and he fired Douglas MacArthur. The president fired his great general. And so the people in America were shocked at this. The American forces were now doomed to a war of attrition against the Red Chinese masses. Because basically it would be a no-win war. We're just trying to keep, everything stable there, contain them and all this. And it would go from that and on to the same situation that would happen later on in Vietnam War. So MacArthur wanted to still attack China, and he spoke to the newspapers about his plan. He wrote to the Republican leaders, and then on April 1st, he was fired. Here's what he said. I am concerned for the security of our great nation, not so much because of any threat from without, but because of the insidious forces working from within. So he felt there was a lot of forces, political forces, that were wanting to, from within America, wanting to keep basically keep a war going here, which we find out, yeah, probably. So America was shocked by this decision. Americans at home were shocked to hear of MacArthur's removal. No further military advance occurred, and peace talks stalled over the return of prisoners of war. So at that point, they stopped their military advances in Korea, and the Soviet leaders began to speak of peace, though, and pushed the Red Chinese and the North Koreans for a truce. So what happened then? The Soviets and the Red Chinese, they started not getting along. They're both communist. And they pushed for, okay, let's have a truce here. You can see, possibly didn't want, America to get rallied up, and put forth a bomb either, right? So many thousands of Red Chinese and North Korean prisoners of war refused to return to communist slavery in their homelands and came to want to remain in the prisoners of the United Nations. I just smile at that. What does that mean? Is that we had a lot of prisoners, Red Chinese prisoners, and we had North Korean prisoners. And we said, okay, we will return your prisoners, you return ours. But they didn't want to go back. They wanted to stay prisoners. They were happier being prisoners of the United States than going back to their country and being under communism. Basically, most of our prisoners wanted to remain, under our control. That's kind of weird, but isn't that the way? They would rather defect. They're soldiers, even they're soldiers. So the UN and North Korea reached a truce on July 27, 1952, but there was no permanent peace settlement was ever made. So they never made a peace settlement. This is really bad because we had a lot of missing in action and POWs, prisoners of war, stuck in a stalemate and stuck in North Korea. That's really sad. I like this, what MacArthur said. The soldier above all others prays for peace, for it is the soldier who must suffer and bear the deepest wounds and scars of war. Douglas MacArthur. He was always behind the soldiers, his soldiers, and they loved him. So, this was the Korean War. So he's upset about this Korean War. MacArthur is, and we should be too, because it actually is a stalemate. So it's not a win for America. The results of the Korean War: the United States suffered over 140,000 casualties. That's casualties are killed and wounded. There were, of these casualties, 36,574 Americans were killed. soldiers, and 103,284 were wounded, and over 5,000 prisoners of war or missing in action. That's a huge number that we never had totally dealt with. Because no final peace treaty was signed, there was no arrangement for the exchange of prisoners. And there was an untold number of Americans who were still in Korea or Red Chinese captivity 30 years later. They had been in prison for 30 years, in POW camps for 30 years. And some of their remains were not even returned. When they died over there, were not even returned until 65 years later. In fact, even now they're returning some of the bones of our Americans that over in North Korea or in Red China. So it's looking like, we could have at least dealt with that, I think. The Korean War demonstrated the United Nations did not have the ability to deal adequately with communist aggression. This is because of the United Nations. We had gone with the United Nations in charge instead of the United States in charge. But anyway, so they couldn't deal with the aggression with communism. But here we have, there was a stalemate. It's called stalemate. Basically, Korea remained divided, and how many deaths? 36,574 deaths actually, and 1.3 million Korean deaths. It was a win. It was a no-win. It says win or loss for containment. It was a no-win war, sadly. MacArthur addresses to Congress in April 19, 1951. On the pressing view of the defeating communist expansion, he's talking. So MacArthur gets up and he talks to Congress. And he, on this date, everyone is listening to Douglas MacArthur. They love him. Remember, Americans loved him. And they wonder, what is going on? He said, once war is faced upon us, there is no other alternative than to apply every available means to bring it to swift end. The war's very object is victory, not prolonged indecision. In war, indeed, there can be no substitute for victory. So he's saying, once we're in a war, we need to fight for our soldiers. We don't just put our soldiers in a war and just keep them there and say there's no win. We just want to just have you keep fighting, and that at that point it becomes there's no substitute for victory. How right. So here we have Douglas MacArthur again. It says MacArthur presented this speech as a response to being removed from command in the Korean War by President Truman. MacArthur's speech was a sensation. Some 30 million Americans had watched it on television. Though MacArthur only spoke for 34 minutes, members of Congress interrupted him more than 30 times with applause. Kept applauding for him. Everything he said, they applauded. That's Douglas MacArthur. Now we're going to go on to the Chinese dilemma, but I'm going to have to stop here. We're getting kind of long, and we'll get on to the next video, and we'll deal with what now is going on in China.